Shalom chaverim, hello friends, and welcome back. I'm Rabbi Stern, and I don't know how many of you know, but I am a rabbi in Kansas, in Topeka, Kansas. And there's a famous YouTuber who does a lot of history and social studies stuff. He's a teacher named Mr. Beat, and he has a video called "Why Do People Hate Jews?" And I thought it was important to see what he thought of, especially because his research is always so good. So let's go ahead and watch Mr. Beat try and answer the question, why do some people, unfortunately, hate Jews? Okay, let's get started.
I am a dude known as Mr. Beat. Over the years, I have encountered opinions online like this.
Talking about the wicked ones in the Jewish community that run America, run the government, run the world, own the banks, own the means of communication. They are my enemy.
Jews control the mass media in this country. They control the United States federal government, and they control the Federal Reserve
It's tough to hear
Bank.
these.
I'm here to spread ideas, talk, in the hopes that somebody more capable will come along and do that. Somebody like Donald Trump, who does not give his daughter to a Jew.
Jews will not replace us.
Charlottesville.
Jews will not replace us.
Pretty disturbing, yes. And then I went to my colleagues and asked them this question. If there was just one group of people that has been kind of consistently persecuted throughout world history, what's the first group that comes to mind to you? I probably should tell you here that I did not tell them what to say beforehand. This was not scripted. In fact, they had no idea what this video was going to be about. They just were being nice and said, yeah, sure, I'll answer a couple questions on camera for you.
The Jewish population.
Oh, good.
And Jewish people.
Wow.
The first group I probably think of with that would be the Jewish people.
Almost every single one of my colleagues said the same thing. They said the same group was the one that
That's
first
impressive.
came to mind when they thought about groups that were targeted throughout world history. And even though Jews make up less than 1/4% of the total world population, they do seem to come up a lot as a group that is consistently targeted, no matter where we're talking about, no matter what time period, including the present. What causes anti-Semitism?
Because for the most part they're ignorant of what it really stands for. We always have a habit when times get tough of blaming things that we don't know for the reason why things go wrong.
That's really fascinating, and I think a really deep insight from that teacher. I think that often people will ask, well, how can certain stereotypes that they see as maybe even positive things be bad? Like Jews have a lot of money or Jews have a lot of power. But the implication that Jews are using that money and power in nefarious ways, especially when times get tough and people try to take it out on the Jews because we're doing so good in their mind. And that's where these stereotypes can be really damaging. And the assumption, of course, that we're out to harm anyone is deeply offensive, because that's the opposite of what Judaism is about. Judaism is about being present for the world and helping in the repair of the world, making the world a better place. So, no, I'm glad to hear that teacher put it that way. There is a lot of ignorance, unfortunately.
I would say in a lot of cases because they've been a minority group in an area that's been
You've always been a minority and everywhere.
Many of the places made them an easy scapegoat for a lot of majority groups to persecute or to blame social ills on.
I think they've disseminated throughout many of the populations of the European countries and have always been a minority. They have been easy to be picked on. and persecuted and scapegoated for many of the problems of countries as they've gone through economic turmoil and political turmoil.
And not to discount any of my colleagues' opinions, they were all great answers, but I did my own research on this, and here is why Jews are hated. But before I dive into it, I want to let you know that I am making this video alongside Grant Hurst. Before we look at why people hate Jews, also known as anti-Semitism, we need to define Jew. A Jew is someone who identifies with the cultural community whose traditional religion is Judaism, who traces their ancestry to the ancient Hebrew people of Israel, all the way back to Abraham. Jewish people are considered an ethno-religious group, both an ethnic group and a religion. There are plenty who identify as Jews yet are not religious. Israel's law of return, which is the law that gives Jews the right to visit and be a citizen of Israel, says a Jew is someone with either a Jewish mother or who has converted to Judaism. Anyway, during the time of Jesus in ancient Israel, many were of course Jewish, including Jesus himself. After Jesus died, his followers started a new religion called Christianity. As Christianity spread and as more and more Roman emperors converted to the religion, Jews became marginalized in society. Even though Jews worship the same God as Christians did, Roman rulers viewed the refusal of the Jewish community to accept Jesus as the Messiah as a threat. They straight up passed laws that discriminated against Jews. In the year 399, a law saying Jews couldn't marry Christians. In 439, a law saying Jews couldn't hold positions in government. In 531, a law saying they couldn't appear as witnesses against Christians in court. Rumors began to spread that Jews had horns and tails, and that they killed Christian children and used their blood for rituals. In the Middle Ages, many societies forced Jews to live in segregated ghettos and wear special clothing. The Catholic Church did not allow Jews to own land, so Jews couldn't build up wealth through property. However, the church also didn't let Christians loan money for profit. Jews could, so they often turned to money lending to build up wealth. Due to the fact that nearly every money lender happened to be Jewish, this ended up creating a stereotype that Jews were greedy. I mean, people who loan money and charge interest throughout history have rarely been seen in a positive light.
That's true.
Am I right? Christian rulers used Jewish money to build extravagant churches and build up armies. By the 11th century, Christianity dominated Europe, and the main minority religion was Judaism. Jews seemed to be the one group Christians could not convert, seen as outsiders. By this time, the Catholic Church was even teaching that Jews were responsible for the death of Jesus. And then
that wouldn't be changed until actually very recently.
Black Death. During the 14th century, the bubonic plague spread quickly across Europe, killing around a third of its entire.
Yeah, the Black Death was yet another bad point for, well, it was a bad point for all of Europe, but it was a bad point for the Jews of Europe as well. Jews were considered to be outsiders, as he said, and so we lived apart, but also we have many different rituals, both for dealing with those who die, and also just as part of our weekly Shabbat, we have special times for hand washing even. It's something that didn't quite affect us as much, and we were blamed as if we were the cause of it.
Population. Since this was before science, people had no idea what was causing it. Due to superstition and fear, and without any evidence whatsoever, Christians blamed Jews for causing the plague, accusing them of poisoning wells to spread the disease. Probably one reason why Jews seemed to be a scapegoat was because they were not dying from the plague as much as Christians. We now know this was because Jews were generally isolated in ghettos away from Christians during this time. And because they were better about cleaning themselves and washing dead bodies before burial due to their religious customs. Still, tens of thousands of Jews were burned alive after being blamed for causing the plague. In 1543, Martin Luther, who gets credit for starting the Protestant Reformation, wrote a pamphlet called On the Jews and Their Lies. In it, he claimed Jews thirsted for Christian blood, and he actually encouraged the killing of Jews. Looking ahead at 1873, when the term antisemitism first appeared by a dude named Wilhelm Marr. Marr wrote that Jews were secretly trying to take over the government and that they shouldn't be citizens. In 1894, in what became known as the Dreyfus Affair, authorities accused a Jewish French army captain named Alfred Dreyfus of selling military secrets to the Germans. After evidence proved his innocence, anti-Semitic French authorities covered that up so he would be found guilty anyway. In 1903, the Russian secret police...
That was the spark for Theodore Herzl's... Theodore Herzl covered the case as a journalist, and the famous story is that case gave him the urge to become a Zionist and a leader in the Zionist movement.
Police published some fake documents that were known as the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which described a conspiracy by rabbis to take over the world. The Russian secret police later murdered entire Jewish communities.
Russians.
After the communists took over in 1917, more than 500 Jewish communities in Ukraine were wiped out, and around 60,000 Jews were killed in what became known as pogroms. Today, the word pogrom means any organized massacre of a certain ethnic group. Then there is probably the most famous and horrifying genocide in world history, the Holocaust, during Adolf Hitler's reign of terror. He and his fellow Nazis blamed Jews for all of Germany's major economic and social problems after World War I. At the time in Germany, anti-Semitism seemed to be everywhere. The Nazis killed up to 6 million Jews during the Holocaust, most of them in extermination camps and concentration camps. The world was shocked to find out about the Holocaust, and fortunately, anti-Semitism declined after World War II. Based on all the attacks on Jews throughout history, for centuries, many Jews like Theodore Herzl argued that the only way to escape persecution, discrimination, and genocide was to create a Jewish state, specifically in Palestine, an area where historically Jews lived.
The British named their mandate. Remember that after World War I, the British and French divvied up much of the Levant. They named it Palestine after the Roman province, Syria Palestina, which was what the Romans renamed Judea as a punishment for the rebellion of the Jews, and in the aftermath of the destruction of the temple in 70 CE.
And the location of ancient Israel. The movement to try to get Jews to return to Palestine to live and establish their own society was known as Zionism. Thanks to the efforts of people like Herzl, the Zionist movement grew, and Great Britain got on board. In 1917, in the Balfour Declaration, Great Britain announced it was establishing a, quote, national home for the Jewish people.
Yeah, not really, though. It's worth noting that while the Balfour Declaration did say, as it says on the screen, His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people and will use their best endeavors to... They never really actually did anything to make that happen. They even restricted Jewish immigration shortly after this. They didn't create a national home for the Jewish people. They were there when it happened.
In Palestine, an area Britain now controlled after the fall of the Ottoman Empire in World War I. At the time, only about 4% of Palestine was Jewish. As more and more Jews moved to Palestine in the 1920s and 1930s, resentment grew among the local Arabs in Palestine, who grew to hate Zionism as a threat to their homeland. You could say Zionism entered the mainstream after people found out how the Nazis had treated the Jews before and during World War II. Many around the world embraced Zionism after the Holocaust, and Britain asked the newly formed United Nations to step in regarding what to do with Palestine. The UN proposed 2 states in Palestine, an Arab one and a Jewish one. At the time, Jews made up only a third of the population of Palestine and owned only 6% of the land. However, the UN's
Okay. The numbers are true. They need a little bit more context than I think he's going to give. It's true that a third of the population was Jewish and 2/3 was Arab. Most of those Arab families were recent immigrants, And they weren't the ones who owned the land, the ones who were in the area. Most of the land was owned by absentee landlords who lived in Syria and Transjordan and especially Egypt. There were a lot more Arabs living around there who could rush in, and did in the 30 years prior to the 1947 plan. I think the statistic is right, but a little disingenuous.
State solution called for 55% of the land area for the Jewish state. On May 14, 1948, leaders announced the creation of the State of Israel, which immediately caused a war with neighboring Arab countries. Israel held back those Arab forces, but it ended up causing more than 700,000 Palestinian Arabs to flee their homeland.
Around 700,000 Arabs who lived in the area of Palestine did leave their homes. Many were encouraged to do so by attacking Arab armies, promising that after those armies that you saw in the last slide killed all of the Jews and destroyed the fledgling state of Israel, that those Arabs would be allowed to come back. Of course, the armies didn't win. Israel was victorious in the war, and so those people, many of whom remain in squalid conditions as refugees in foreign countries because they weren't given citizenship in the countries they fled to. Meanwhile, Arab countries and countries across the Middle East and North Africa expelled their Jews to the tune of actually 1 million. So even more refugees. They were resettled in Israel, given citizenship as Israelis. It was a tough time economically to try and integrate all those immigrants, but it was for the best, and it was definitely something that Israeli society was committed to doing, to be there for all Jews, not just Jews of any one particular background. So this is deeply complicated history, and I think it's a little brief.
And why do I bring up modern Israel? Well, while much of the anti-Semitism that exists today,
because people hide behind the term anti-Zionism when what they are practicing is anti-Semitism.
Has its roots in the Middle Ages, a lot of it boiled over with the creation of Israel.
You have as well a new form of anti-Semitism that is...
I actually worked briefly at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. Terrific, terrific, terrific museum. It's in Washington, D.C. Please see it if you get a chance.
Closely linked with anti-Zionism and hostility towards Israel. There is legitimate criticism of the policies of Israel, but there is a fine line that some people...
There is absolutely legitimate criticism of the policies of the State of Israel. I do it all the time. I've done it in recent days. Israelis do it all the time as well. Criticizing the policies of the State of Israel is totally legitimate, even if in some areas we may disagree, but that's totally fine. The problem comes in when we start to say things like Israel shouldn't exist.
People cross very easily between criticism of Israel and anti-Semitism.
In other words, some claim the creation of Israel and how the Israeli government has treated Palestinians and other Arabs ever since has also caused a new wave of anti-Semitism. Fortunately, today we don't see the systematic government-sponsored discrimination and genocide of Jews that we used to see prior to and during World War II. However, hop online and you will still see lots of hatred of Jews.
For sure.
There are lots of anti-Semitic groups that still exist around the world, and chances are you will see below this very video anti-Semitic comments. Go ahead and check it out. I'm sure they are there. Even if it's not straight up hatred, stereotypes persist about Jews. In 2009, an Anti-Defamation League poll found that 18% of respondents believe that, quote, Jews have too much power in the business world.
I'm actually surprised the number is that low, and I know that's sad.
And 13% of respondents said Jews, quote, are more likely than others to use shady practices to get what they want.
It's worth noting that especially in business, Judaism has a lot of rules that actually mandate ethical treatment and business of workers and business practices.
Another poll given to citizens of Egypt, Lebanon, and Jordan found that more than 89% of respondents had a, quote, very unfavorable opinion of Jews. We know the history now, but why does anti-Semitism persist? Well, I think David Feldman, director of the Pears Institute for the Study of Anti-Semitism, puts it best. Quote, people who dislike Jews rarely dislike only Jews, unquote. Jews often get lumped with other hated groups, all convenient scapegoats. When people today blame the Jews...
Hey, okay, so these signs, these people, and you see back of her shirt says Phelps van on it. That's strange, but these are people from the Westboro Baptist Church. Westboro is a neighborhood here in Topeka. The Westboro Baptist Church actually still pickets my synagogue. They've been doing it for many years. A predecessor of mine named Rabbi Larry Carroll actually had his name on some of the signs. They were so angry with him. I'm sure he considers it a badge of honor.
For the world's problems and say they secretly control everything, these are just old traditions passed down and taught to them. They are, frankly, unoriginal. So there's a lot of momentum that is hard to reverse. Jews have faced persecution, discrimination, and violence against them around the world for a couple thousand years, after all. And while the bigger question is always, why do people hate others? It's important to also ask why specific groups are constantly targeted. Jews have constantly been one such group. As you watch this video right now, there are fathers somewhere in the world teaching their sons to hate Jews at this very moment. Anti-Semitism, unfortunately, persists. And it's up to us to make it a thing of the past.
Yeah, it is up to us to make it a thing of the past. Thank you for a very interesting video, Mr. Beat. I hope you'll join us for the next video. Shalom.